By 1882, the British simply occupied Egypt and made sure that nothing that would undermine British security or British access through the Suez Canal.
Meanwhile, France concentrated on Algeria, intent on making it the breadbasket of Europe.
The lands of the people were all confiscated. The Arabic language and the religion of Islam were discouraged by the French, so that was a more vicious type of colonialism.
But it was World War I that caused many Islamic nations to come under direct foreign rule. In 1914, the crumbling Ottoman Empire allied itself with the Central Powers of Germany, Austria, and Hungary. Upon their defeat in 1918, the remaining Ottoman territories became spoils of war, to be divided up among the winners. Britain obtained control of Egypt, Palestine, and Arabia. France took Lebanon, Syria, Morocco, and Tunisia, in addition to its already established colony of Algeria.
What this does is that effectively it deconstructs and dismantles the system of authority that Islam had developed over 1,200 years.
Under the colonial yoke, unrest was brewing, fueled by disgruntled Muslim writers and scholars. Ultimately, their goal would be to drive out the West and to establish their own governments based on traditional Islamic principles. One of the most effective of these opposition groups was the Muslim Brotherhood.
The Muslim Brotherhood is an organization which was founded in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna in Egypt, which originally was meant to regenerate Islam in that country. But later on, it became a significant and revolutionary political movement.
The Muslim Brotherhood was an important part of the revolutionary efforts that ultimately led to Britain's withdrawal from Egypt in the 1950s. Elsewhere, after World War II, other colonies found their own routes to independence. Some peaceful, others bloody. Yet some of these fledgling nations didn't return to traditional Islamic ideals. Instead, many new states fell under power-hungry secular and authoritarian governments, often corrupt reflections of the Western colonialism from which they won their freedom.
Most people in the West forget that one of the most important heritages of imperialism throughout the world, and in particular in the Middle East, is that imperialism brought to the Middle East real ideas and skills in having central authoritarian governments.
The groups resisting these new forms of rule became known as Islamists, whose message is reflected in the words of Sayyid Qutb, leader of the Muslim Brotherhood.
It is necessary to revive that Muslim community, which is buried under the debris of the man-made traditions of several generations, and which is crushed under the weight of those false laws and customs which are not even remotely related to the Islamic teachings.
While modern Islam was struggling to redefine itself, its diverse societies were evolving into different forms, from the progressive to the puritanical. One particularly influential and puritanical Islamic movement has become well known to the West in recent years: Wahhabism, which has its roots in the 18th century.
In the middle of the Arabian Peninsula in the 18th century, there was a very strict teacher that emerged. His name was Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab.
Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab achieved a fanatical following among the Bedouin tribes of Arabia by preaching an ascetic, puritanical form of Islam. His followers, the Wahhabis, first gained political power when they forged an alliance with the House of Saud, an ancient royal Arabian bloodline.
You had a tribal chieftain, Muhammad ibn Saud, and a puritanical teacher, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, creating then a system which is the foundation for the Saudi state that was created in the 18th century.
These Saudi leaders became the royalty of modern-day Saudi Arabia.
And so that the foundation of the Saudi state then today is this combination of a desert warrior spirit with a mission of puritanical Islamic reform.
Thanks to the abundant fossil fuels welling up from their ancestral homelands, the Saudi royal family commanded a new source of wealth: oil. With these riches came power, and Wahhabism grew in influence throughout other parts of the Middle East. Petrodollars earned from Middle Eastern oil enriched the Saudi royals. In keeping with charity, the third pillar of Islam, the royals helped fund social programs, build hospitals, schools, and mosques. But some extremists have taken that wealth and put it to violent ends, attacking Western interests under the banner of jihad. Jihad. It is a concept so integral to Islam, many Muslims believe it constitutes a sixth pillar of the faith. But many Muslim scholars and practitioners decry the simplistic warlike interpretation of the term.
The Arabic to English translation of jihad is struggle, and a sacred struggle or a holy struggle, but it is first and foremost an inner struggle.
Growing up in America as a Muslim, I had friends who were dating, I had friends who were drinking, doing all kinds of things that weren't permissible in Islam. And for me, that was my jihad. That was my struggle to deal with those temptations and overcome them and say, you know, this is something that my religion doesn't allow.
The greater jihad is to struggle against your base desires. The lesser jihad is to struggle against an enemy.
It is a radical interpretation of this lesser definition of jihad, with which most of the world is now too tragically familiar.
Over Muslim history, the term jihad has more often meant just war. So it is a kind of just warfare, and that, in the modern sense, is very often determined to be defensive war against external aggressors.
Even so, the Quran places restrictions on those who would wage this type of warfare.
Fight in the cause of Allah, those who fight you, but do not transgress limits, for Allah loveth not transgressors.
In Muslim warfare, it's prohibited to kill women and children, to kill non-combatant civilians, for example. These things are all completely prohibited.
Yet recent events have shown that for many thousands of Muslims, the end justifies the means in their definition of holy war. The events of September 11, 2001 left an entire world speechless with horror. Long before any news report had identified the perpetrators of this heinous deed, many Americans already assumed it was the work of extremist Islamic terrorists. How did a religion that preaches peace and tolerance become so entwined with violence in Western thinking? America's first public encounter with Islam began with the confrontational rhetoric of the Black Muslim movement, the Nation of Islam.